Welcome on into the Utah Blockcast. I'm Steve Bartle, Utah insider for KSL Sports. Fall camp is here. Man, fall camp is here. That's exciting to say. It means the football season is just around the corner. We finally got our schedule for media and fall camp availability. Super excited about that. It looks like we're going to be up there every Wednesday and Thursday this year, and that starts this Wednesday. So super excited about that. Finally have new stuff to talk about. Finally have football season content here. Man, excited about that. So if you can't tell, I'm excited about that. I've said that 4 times now in the first 40 seconds. So off to a strong start here for me. I published an episode on Saturday morning highlighting the last 3 position group previews that I needed to do for fall camp, prior to fall camp, and that included the quarterback, tight end, and offensive line positions. Today, that'll be the defensive side of the ball, previewing the final 3 groups on that side with the defensive end, cornerback, and safety rooms still to get through. So obviously a lot to get to, but yeah, excitement is here. Man, getting that itch to ramp up the coverage, to start diving into some of these team previews and breaking down matchups and all that sort of stuff. So really looking forward to getting back up to up on the hill for practice. We won't have any practice availability in terms of, watching practice, but getting up there to talk to Kyle Whittingham and his assistant coaches on Wednesday, and then having the opportunity to go back up on Thursday to talk to a handful of defensive players. I think that'll be really fun. So excited to get things kicked off this week with fall camp coverage and start creeping our way to the 2025 season. And I say creeping because I know this thing is going to go fast. I can't believe fall camp is here. It felt like July was going to take forever for a sec there, but man, it's here, and now we're basically at the starting line. So it's off and running after this, and man, it's going to be a wild season. It's going to be a lot of fun, and as you've noticed with the Utah Blockcast, episodes are coming at a more frequent pace. So expect more of that, even more of that, I would say, than what I've done. I did 3 last week, and that's what you guys, the listeners, Utah fans, that's what you deserve. So I'm excited to be in this position with KSL Sports. They've done a wonderful job helping me out and all that over the last year and getting me to this point. And they've been super supportive. So super excited about that. And it's been interesting with Utah. There's been a lot of uniform talk. I was going to post a clip of the uniforms, but I think there's an interesting conversation going on with Utah uniforms, and just based on conversations that I've had over the last couple months, I think what we're seeing is Utah shifting towards those throwback uniforms becoming the primary option for Utah this season. I think every opportunity they've had to be in uniform for media days or for any sort of press, any sort of photo shoot, they've all been in those throwbacks. And I think that is telling us something. And so, like I said, I've had a couple conversations that make me believe that we are heading towards those throwbacks becoming the primary option. That doesn't mean the drum and feather is going away. It's just, it's now an option. It's that drum and feather is key to Utah's identity and brand of who they are, and that's not going away. So I think those throwback uniforms are just super clean. Obviously everybody has certain wishes and critiques and, opinions of what they'd like to see. But I think overall, everybody agrees that those throwbacks are just a good looking uniform. I hope we all agree on that, because they are. So I think that's what we're seeing. But would love to hear continued opinions of the uniforms and what you think we'll see this week or this year with those uniforms. Last year was a great uniform season. Unfortunately, it was just not a great season in general. In fact, I think everybody would just sum it up as it sucked. The season sucked. It was a rough ride for all of us. And so hopefully we get obviously a better year for Utah, and hopefully the uniform stuff continues to be a bright spot as well. So anyways, enough about that. Anything else trending? I already talked about Celeste Moa and what's kind of going on there with his announcement coming this Thursday. And we'll see. Obviously, it's boiling down to Utah and Tennessee. I still like, here we are Wednesday or Monday. It's not Wednesday, it's Monday. I've got Wednesday on the mind because that's when fall camp begins. But on Monday, as of 6:30 p.m. is when I'm recording this, which I'm recording this for the second time today because the first time, mic issues. I swear, mic issues, I can't escape them. I'm going to figure them out, though. I'm going to figure them out, and they're not going to be a problem this year. But I'm recording this for the second time, and so it's 6:30 p.m. And as of that time on a Monday, I still feel cautiously optimistic about Utah's chances with Celeste Moa there, and yeah, that would be pretty huge. Like I did the run through on the last episode, he would have a significant impact on Utah's class, how it looks, how it ranks, how it feels. I think it would be a tremendous win. Celeste is a fantastic. He's not just a fantastic talent; he's an elite talent. He is so damn good. He is good at football analysis, hit tweet, all those things. So Celeste would be obviously a welcomed addition to the class, which already has 1 5-star in it. It'd be great to add another. And so yeah, so that's that. So we'll see. All right. Enough yammering. Let's get into these position group previews, and let's start by taking a look at the defensive end room. I think this is a position group that is obviously in a bit of transition, moving, having to move on from two stalwarts in that room with Van Fillinger and Connor O'Toole, who have been in that defensive end room for a handful of years each. And this is a group that looks different than what we've seen, not just because Van and Connor are no longer in that room, but there's a different a different body type, a different athleticism. It's a different look and feel, and so to that point, I think first year in the Big 12 program, and this is I'm just diving into it in the deep end, just getting into the conversation around the defensive end, but you'll understand why I'm starting here. I think the first year in the Big 12 conference, going up against a lot of these offenses, one thing that I realized as I watched it week in, week out, the offenses here is, these quarterbacks get the ball out of their hands quickly, and that is in part to negate the pass rush that we see in the Big 12, to negate the effectiveness of that. There were a lot of quarterbacks in the Big 12 that had a time to throw of less than 2.5 seconds, and so that's really hard as a pass rusher to get to the quarterback in less than 2.5 seconds. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I can pull those up, and I'm going to talk while I do that, because again, I do think that these quarterbacks in the Big 12 it's a point of emphasis across the league, is what it felt like, where these offenses are designed to get the ball out of the hands of the quarterback in a relatively fast manner, like getting the ball out quick. And so, there were a handful of guys, and let me make sure I've got everybody that I need to in this list here. So under 3 seconds. So not 2.5. 2.5 would be blistering fast. But Alan Bowman led the conference at 2.36 seconds time to throw. From the snap to the throw, it took him 2.36 seconds. That's super fast. Josh Hoover, 2.44. Sawyer Robinson, 2.6. Rocco Beck, 2.64. Bayron Morton, 2.72. And the list goes on and on. Brendan Sorsby, 2.77. Like, there are a lot of quarterbacks in the league this year that get the ball out of their hands really quick, less than 3 seconds. And so it's not 2.5 seconds, but it's still under 3 seconds. And that's a fast time. So I think, what I'm getting to here is, if you look at the defensive end room this year compared to last year, if you look at the roster, you look at some of the heights and weights, there is a noticeable difference from from a from a weight dynamic, where you look at some of the defensive ends last year. A lot of them were over 250 pounds, pushing 260. Van Fillinger, obviously, I think Connor O'Toole was up that high as well. And I think what I learned, maybe what Utah realized, is that, hey, we need some more dynamic athletes in this room. We can sacrifice a little bit of size, but we need more athleticism in this room. And I think that's what you see in this defensive end room, is guys that are 240 to 250 pounds that have more of that elite quickness, I shouldn't say elite, but they have more of that burst, that explosiveness, that twitchiness that is more conducive to getting to the quarterback in a timely manner. So I think that was something that I think I learned, and maybe Utah learned, maybe they didn't, I don't know. But I think that is going to have, I think that's going to have an impact on the defensive end room and the position group and their production this season. I'm fascinated to see how it actually plays out with this group, but I think the shift should lead to a more disruptive pass rush this season, at the very least. Now, getting to some of the individuals in this room, I think it's appropriate to start with the guy Logan Fano as the headliner of this room. And I think there's a lot of optimism, according to people that I've talked to and conversations that I've had. There's a lot of optimism about Logan's potential this season. I think it's important to understand that, Logan spending all offseason rehabbing from an injury in 2024, going into the 2024 season, that was a long process. And you could see it even in the early parts of the year that Logan was still kind of playing it safe. He was protecting his knee, playing technically sound football, and you could see him protecting himself. And I think this year, without the need to rehab and spend time with the trainers, it's allowed him to spend more time on his actual development, on his skill and technique development. And I think that's had a really positive impact on his, again, based on the conversations that I've had, it's had a really positive impact on his level of play. And so, you look at his production last year, 2.5 sacks. It's not something that you're coming into the season where you're pumping up your chest saying, yeah, Logan Fano's going to be that guy. Look at what he did last year. It's not that type of thing. But when you consider the context of what he went through last offseason compared to this offseason, and Utah's track record and history at this position, you can go through the last few years. Jonah Ellis in 2023, Mika Tafua in 2021, Bradley Anai in 2019. Look at their production the year before their breakout years, and it all kind of falls in line with what Logan produced last season. So Logan led the team last year with 33 total pressures, only 2.5 sacks, but 33 total pressures. When you look at what Jonah Ellis did in 2022 prior to his breakout season, you come away feeling better about Logan's potential to make that sort of jump. So let me pull up his numbers here. Going back to 2022, I believe this was Jonah Ellis's sophomore season. So as a pass rusher, he totaled 24 pressures, 3.5 sacks. He, the thing where I think, you felt really good about his potential was his individual win rate and what he was able to do there. But again, 24 pressures and 3.5 sacks in 2022. You go back to, I'm not going to go to 2020 because we all know what COVID was, that COVID season. It doesn't exist. It didn't happen. It wasn't real. So I'm going to go back to 2019 to highlight Mika Tafua's performance in 2021. So in 2019, as Mika Tafua served in a complementary role to Bradley and I, Mika totaled 25 pressures and I believe 3.5 sacks as well. You go back to 2018, and Bradley and I wasn't necessarily in a complementary role, but he had 50 total pressures, 9.5 sacks, I believe, is what he ended with. And so obviously pretty significant production from Bradley and I there in 2018. But you see the trend each and every year where these guys are producing at a solid rate prior to their breakout seasons. And now I'm going to go through the rundown of what they did the following season to follow that up. Bradley and I in 2019, 58 total pressures, 12 sacks according to PFF. That's what I'm reading here. Again, remember Mika Tafua, 25 pressures, 3.5 sacks in 2019. In 2021, Mika Tafua, 67 pressures. I believe he finished with 8.5 sacks. And then 2023 with Jonah Ellis, 39 total pressures, 14.5 sacks is what I believe he ended with there as well. So that's the sort of jump in production that Utah has had a history of. And again, that's why I'm optimistic about Logan Fano's potential going into this season, where he has to be the guy, and he is the guy that has the experience. He has the athletic qualities that you need. He has the size. He has all of the natural qualities that you want. And I think having the year healthy, having the off season where he was healthy and able to focus on his game and skill development, I think that's going to bode really, really well for Logan going into this season. Now, as for the spot opposite of Logan Fano, that's going to be really interesting. I think you've got a handful of guys that are in the mix there. And, you know, the guy that perhaps caught everybody by surprise in terms of, you know, his performance in spring ball and the conversation, you know, from coaches and players around him was John Henry Daly. He had a really productive spring, put himself in position as the starter opposite of Logan Fano, at least penciled in as that guy. And so you look at him and, you know, he's another 240-pound defensive end. He has that burst off the line of scrimmage, off the snap, where he can get into the backfield quickly, which again kind of speaks to that athleticism. Another guy that I think is going to be in the mix, Paul Fitzgerald, the Utah State transfer, who has experience and sack production to his name from his time at Utah State. Very similar build and athleticism to Logan Fano at 6'4", 245 pounds. He's got that twitch. He's got that fluidity. You like him in the mix as well. Cash Dillon has had a really good offseason, according to people that I've talked to. Just one of those guys that puts in the work and tries to outwork everybody. And those guys typically find success at Utah. So Cash Dillon, and he's kind of what sparked that idea about this shift in body types and shift in terms of priorities, shifting more towards athleticism than size, because he's a guy that I think could pack on quite a bit of size and could play at 260. He could play at 265. You know, he can be that big body type, but he's coming into fall camp, at least according to the official roster, at just over 240 pounds. So that to me is kind of something where I say, what's going on? I pull, what's going on in Utah? And I think Cash Dillon, you know, that caught my attention. So I think that's going to be interesting. I think he's going to be in the mix. You know, and then there's two other guys in this defense end room, and Lance Holtzclaw and Jackson Jones, who both came to Utah via the transfer portal from former Pac-12 foes, Washington and Oregon. I think Jones is a guy that's, you know, he's got potential as a dynamic pass rusher. I think Lance Holtzclaw is probably the guy more prepared to contribute this season. I think from what I've heard, he's got you know, those explosive, quick twitch qualities, which again is another reason why I think there's been a shift in their sort of prioritization of what they value in that position. And so, you know, it's all going to depend on how well he's rounded out the rest of his game. Speaking of Holtzclaw, I think he can be a dynamic presence in the pass rush, and I think he will have a role this season in that sense as sort of at the very least, as sort of a designated pass rusher. But I think there's definitely room for him to become an all-around defensive end. So all of that said, I think, pass rush, this defensive end group, it's judged largely by sack numbers, and I don't think that's fair. That's essentially like qualifying wins as quarterback stats. It's just, obviously it's the primary statistic that, and what drives their paydays in the NFL and that sort of stuff. But I think there are other metrics that also represent how effective, defensive ends are, pressure rate, how often are you getting to the quarterback? I think that's more important than just sack numbers. Sack numbers can sometimes be a little fluky, but I think what's going to be key above everything else, beyond improving the pass rush numbers in terms of sacks and pressure rates, is Utah simply has to be better on first and second down against the run. They've got to get the opposing offenses in third and longer situations than what they did. They have to do a better job of that this year than what they did last year. That's going to be the key, is performing on first and second down to give these pass rushers an opportunity to have that green light, to just go get the quarterback on third down. So that's going to be the key for this group. I like the makeup of this room. I like sort of the shift towards more athletic types. I think that's going to bode well for the pass rush. And I really like Logan Fano's potential to emerge as the mayor of Sac Lake City this season. I think there's a lot of good things trending positively for him. And I think that's going to bode well for him. And another factor that contributes to an effective pass rush is good coverage. And leading Utah this year is going to be cornerback Smith Snowden. He's got to be CP1 or CB1 this year. And I think everything that he's done up to this point this offseason points to that being the case. And what I've noticed and realized as I've kind of done, a deeper dive on Snowden and sort of the trajectory he's on, I went back and I looked at the cornerbacks that have also been on this 3-year timeline, Clark Phillips and Jalen Johnson. And I came away very impressed with what Smith Snowden was able to do in his second year in this defense. I think he's ahead of the curve compared to where Clark and where Jalen were in year 2. Now, it's going to be up to Smith Snowden to make that leap that Clark and Jalen did in year 3. So what is that going to look like? Well, Smith is going to have to become more of a ball hawk. He's got to make those game-changing plays. He's got to become a playmaker. He's got to increase those interception numbers. He's got to continue to play that sticky coverage. So let me get to why I feel Smith Snowden is ahead of the curve of where Jalen Johnson and Clark Phillips were at the end of year 2. So let me get to that here. Smith Snowden last season in coverage limited opponents to 41.5% completion percentage when targeted. So he only allowed 27 receptions on 65 targets for a 41% completion percentage. He had 2 interceptions and he had 6 PBUs. That's really impressive. Beyond the PBUs, he had 9 forced incompletions. So he had a really good forced incompletion rate. That's typically what PFF regards as just good coverage forcing an incompletion. So remember those numbers. 41.5% completion percentage in coverage, 6 PBUs, 2 interceptions. Going to 2021. 2021. That was Clark's second year in the program. 2021, Clark Phillips. He was targeted 76 times and allowed 50 receptions for 65.8% completion rate. He had 7 PBUs, which is pretty strong, and 1 interception. So he allowed a lot of receptions, a higher number of receptions, and also didn't have the interception. He only had one interception, but did have 7 PBUs. So sort of in line in terms of ball production with 7 PBUs and 1 interception, but that completion percentage, nearly 66%, is a pretty big difference from what Smith did last year. Now going back to 2018 with Jalen Johnson, Jalen was targeted 65 times and allowed 37 of those targets for receptions for a 56.9% completion rate. He had 4 PBUs and 4 interceptions. So again, a higher completion rate, similar ball production in terms of PBUs and interceptions. He took the ball away more. And you look at what those guys did in year 3. Jalen Johnson limited 45.8% of 59 targets for completions. He had 7 PBUs and 2 interceptions in 2022. Clark's third year, he still allowed 62.9% completion rate, but had 3 PBUs and 6 interceptions. So he was allowing more receptions, but countered that with 6 takeaways. And I think that was the big thing for Clark. So Smith Snowden is ahead of the curve in terms of coverage and stickiness and allowing completions. He's in line in terms of ball production and takeaways. And I think that's going to be the key for him going into year 3 and embracing more of those CB1 opportunities where he's taking on the opponent's best receiver on a fairly consistent basis. I think that's going to be the key for him. How much progress and improvement does he make in that sense? And I think that's going to be really exciting to see for Smith. I know that he's worked hard. Obviously, he's going to do a lot for Utah this year. He's going to continue to contribute on special teams as the kick returner. He's going to now potentially even add some offensive duties to his plate as well, which I think is super exciting. But Smith has to be that guy in this cornerback room for Utah this season. And he's continued to put in the work as he's needed to in order to take that step. So there's a lot of optimism around Smith Snowden. Now, for the rest of the group, you've got Scooby Davis returning. And I want to say this about Scooby. Had the opportunity to talk to him during spring ball, and the kid that I saw there compared to the kid that I saw in camps in previous years was totally different. You could see the confidence that he gained, not only as a player, but as a person. He was more engaging. He was more willing to talk and be open about things and have more opinions on things and to just be more engaging. I thought that last year, prior to him playing, he was a little bit shy. He was a little bit timid, but he was a very different person in spring ball this year. And I think that's going to translate on the field as well with the experience that he gained after being thrust into the starting lineup after Kenan Johnson's injury in that very first game. Him having to step up last year and, kind of be thrown into the fire and have to learn some hard lessons along the way, but also make plays. He had good performances along the way, most notably that Oklahoma State game in Stillwater. That was his best game in terms of how he graded out. According to PFF, I believe he scored, an 82.4 PFF grade in that game. He had an interception in that game and just looked like a guy that Utah could build with. And so I think, he's taken that experience that he gained last year and he's built on it coming into the offseason. So, it's going to be important for him to continue on that upward trajectory because he's now got to be that guy that Zemiah Vaughn was last year. He's got to be that stalwart, that steady presence in the secondary to complement Smith Snowden and to allow the other spot, which is going through a bit of a battle right now, to work its way into the mix, into a good playing level of play. What am I trying to say? You know what I'm trying to say. I hope you know what I'm trying to say anyways. But speaking of that spot specifically, Blake Cotton, Donovan Saunders, those are going to be the 2 primary candidates in that battle for that starting spot. You've got Jeremiah Caldwell, who also joined the program with those other two during the winter transfer portal. But that starting spot, is going to come down to Blake Cotton and Donovan Saunders. And, starting with Saunders specifically, Utah recruited him the first time he hit the portal. So this is, after transferring, so let me reset here. Going back 2 years ago, he entered the portal after a couple of seasons at Cal Poly, a couple really good seasons at Cal Poly, and Utah was recruiting him. Utah was in the mix for him. They wanted him. He was a top priority for them. They felt like they had a really good shot at landing him. He ultimately ended up at Texas A&M. He goes to Texas A&M. He's unable to crack the rotation there. He hits the portal, and Utah brings him in this past cycle. So this is a guy that Utah really liked the first time he entered the portal. And, he's got the qualities that are going to remind folks of players like Keith McGill and Sean Smith, those tall, lanky cornerbacks that just, have a way in press coverage of disrupting timing, of just being super physical. That's what Donovan Saunders is. And I think the key for him is, finding a balance between being physical but playing a clean brand of coverage. That's going to be the key for him. He kind of struggled being a little grabby, being a little too physical at times, drawing some laundry on the field and getting penalized in spring ball. I think if he can find a good balance between being physical and being technically sound, technically clean, I think that's going to bode really well for him. Getting to the other guy in this battle, Blake Cotton, this is a guy that has a lot of playing experience. He's got 3 years of experience at UC Davis, which again is a lower level, but he has a lot of the qualities that Utah saw in Kenneth Johnson last year. Similar size at 6'1", about 190 pounds. He's physical, he's athletic, and he's a veteran. He's a grizzled vet that's seen a lot of football. And now coming into the Utah program, he's carried himself as that sort of veteran presence. And that's been a real positive for him and this defense in general. So, I think Cotton is probably the odds-on favorite to secure that job, that starting role. But I don't think this is going to be settled coming out of fall camp. We're going to continue to see these two playing quite a bit, rotating quite a bit, which is something that Utah has traditionally done. Last year obviously was out of necessity with Scooby Davis and Cam Calhoun. But, you go back years past 2019, it was Tariq Lewis, it was Josh Nurse, and that sort of thing. So Utah likes to have 4 cornerbacks or 3 outside cornerbacks that can play, and I think they feel good about, those 3. They're going to need depth behind those guys that I've talked about, Snowden, Scooby, Donovan, and Blake, and that's where Jeremiah Caldwell come in. That's where other guys like J.C. Hart and Jalen Moson, who they brought in during the spring portal window, have to step up. Those guys are going to be counted on to provide depth at that cornerback spot. And so we'll get a better feel for what they bring to the table. But I know that Utah was really excited about those two coming in. They felt like they upgraded in a significant manner over the 2 that left that position in spring. They feel they've upgraded in a major way. And when you look at just what's on paper, J.C. Hart is 6'2", has 4'3", 40 times to his name, and you love that combination when you think of size and athleticism and how that translates, how Utah has been able to mold cornerbacks that have those qualities. You really get excited about what that could mean for J.C. Hart. And then with Jalen Moson, he's coming to Utah from Furman, which obviously is another lower level school, but he's got playing experience and played at a good level where he earned all freshman conference honors. And so you like bringing that into the mix. He's kind of viewed as the guy to primarily serve as backup to Snowden in the slot, but we'll know for sure once we get into fall camp and get a better feel for what these guys actually bring. So love the makeup here. And to round out the conversation in the secondary, let's get to the safety group. And this guy, Tao Johnson, I'm super excited about what he can potentially be for Utah this year. He's been in the program. I believe this will now be his 4th year. He's a redshirt junior. And going into his second year at free safety, I think is going to be, I think has the potential to have a significant impact on his production. I think we need to understand that, even though he's been playing, in that defense secondary, he played nickel in 2023. It's a totally different world going from the slot where you're so focused on what's directly in front of you, where you're kind of in the thick of it, around the line of scrimmage, to then moving to center field where you're the last line of defense and you've got to keep your eyes open to everything on the field. You can't get beat on either side, and you still have to maintain your vision of what's going on in the backfield. That can take some time and reps to get down. It's an adjustment. And I think we saw some really good things from Tao, where now that he's getting into his second year in the position, he can start to process. He's now comfortable with his role. He's comfortable with, sort of his job and how he goes about it, where he can start processing things even a split second faster. And that can make all the difference when you're talking about what that can mean for a free safety. So, with Tao, you love his frame, you love his athleticism. We saw at times his range and his ability to cover large spaces. He can cover a lot of ground. And, what we saw from him in spring ball, he looked noticeably different in terms of his physical build. He's definitely added weight, and I think that's going to really help him out as a tackler. That was really, when you go back and you look at Marcus Williams going into his third year in 2016, he put on the weight, and that allowed him to become the surest tackler, I believe, at safety, and I believe one of the surest tacklers in the country. If I remember correctly, PFF recently put out, and I say recently, within the last 2 years, but PFF recently put out something that highlighted Marcus Williams as a tackler, as one of the surest tacklers, if I'm remembering correctly. But regardless, Marcus Williams had the ball production. That's what everybody remembers. But he was a sure tackler, and I think that's got to be the key for Tao. Is obviously getting more comfortable in his role as a free safety and what that can mean in terms of his ball production. But being an eraser, being a sure tackler, that's going to be just as important for him going into 2025. Now, what about the spot opposite of him, the strong safety position? Luckily, Utah has a guy that sort of came on strong down the final stretch of the season in Rabbit Evans, who parlayed that into a good offseason. He had a very good spring ball and really kind of set himself apart, not only in the safety room, but on the defense overall. He really put himself at the forefront of the conversation as, one of the more disruptive defenders on this defensive unit, just based on what we saw in spring ball. So this is a guy that is going to be very comfortable around the line of scrimmage. He was really disruptive getting into the backfield. He was a playmaker against the run. He was a sure tackler against the run. He was able and willing to jump, screen pass routes and that sort of thing. He was just very aggressive in being that sort of ball hawking safety that Morgan Scalley loves. And I think that's a great compliment to what Utah has in Tao Johnson, where he can be that center fielder and patrol, the deep zones. Rabbit Evans, that allows him to frees him up to kind of be that disruptive presence around the line of scrimmage. Now, Rabbit also was a solid defender in coverage. He allowed about 70%, a 70% completion rate, but he only allowed 8 yards per reception. So everything was in front of him. Everything was short, check down type of passes essentially. And I think there's potential there for him to become an effective coverage defender as well. And then you've got a guy that's been with the program a handful of years now, and Nate Ritchie, and he's going to be that steady presence. He's going to be that veteran, the guy that the young guys look to, and those guys are important because they sort of set the tone. They're important to the identity and culture that you have in the program and in your room specifically. I think Nate Ritchie is not just going to be that type of leader, but he's going to be a key third rotational safety for Morgan Scalley in this defense. I think it's valuable. It's rather valuable to have that sort of versatility where you have that sort of depth. And I think Ritchie, he had a good spring. And what you hope for Ritchie is that, he's just healthy. He's been bothered by nagging injuries over the last couple of seasons that have hindered his ability to reach his potential. And what you're hoping for is that he's just healthy and he can be the playmaker, the best playmaker that he can be. And so beyond those three, Utah has a couple guys that I'm really excited about and interested to kind of follow their progress during fall camp. If not for Rabbit Evans, Jackson Benny is a guy that would be the hot topic. He was almost as disruptive as Rabbit Evans. He was all over the field. He was a consistent performer. Basically every practice, we watched Jackson Benny do something that stood out in a positive manner. And he's a big body at 6'2", 205 pounds. He's a great athlete. He's a 4.4 speed type of guy. And you see it on the field. Like, it's not just test numbers. Like, you see his athleticism on the field. So, he might be a guy that works his way into reps this season, just given that combination of size and athleticism. He's going to continue to contribute on special teams. I think he has some exciting potential, just given those qualities that he possesses. And I think he's also got the right mindset of just coming in and working on the little things day in and day out. So Jackson Benny is a guy that I'm interested in. And the other guy is Nathan Tillman. And what we saw from Nathan Tillman during spring ball was a guy that I think fits really well at that free safety position. He can kind of be the heir apparent to Tao Johnson for whenever he moves on from the program. He's got that free safety spot in his future, in my opinion. Similar frame to Tao, where he's kind of, he's 6'1", he's got long arms, kind of lean, he's got range. And we saw good things from him, where he was getting in the mix. He was making plays on the ball and coverage and that sort of stuff. Is he ready to contribute in year one? I'm not sure about that, but I think he's going to be a guy that Utah travels and is going to be on special teams and could certainly play his way into reps this season. I think I wouldn't be totally shocked if he does that. So I think, with this group combined with the cornerback room, obviously you want to see this group continue to make strides in coverage. And I think, being disruptive, becoming more ball hawking, making plays in coverage, and having the experience that this group now has going into 2025, I think that'll bode well for this group. You like the pieces that Utah has in place. There's going to need to be some development of some guys, and guys have to emerge and that sort of stuff. But as we learned last year, Coach Shaw and what he did with Scooby and what he did with Camp Calhoun, you can trust those guys, those coaches, to get the best out of this group. So all in all, I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic about the defense and what they can be this season. Obviously, it's going to be contingent upon, certain guys stepping up, but overall, I really like the makeup of this defense. I like the potential of some individuals in this room and how they sort of project to in terms of their potential roles in production this year. I think Utah has all the ingredients to be another pretty stingy defense in the Big 12 this year. So that'll do it for me with these position group previews. I'll be back on Wednesday evening to be specific, after we talk to the assistant coaches and Coach Whittingham. I'll have a recap, some takeaways of, from what we heard from the coaches to kind of set the table for fall camp. Really excited about the upcoming year, excited for Utah fans and excited for the Utah Blockcast. We're going to continue to ramp up, our coverage here at the Blockcast and continue to be a pretty consistent source for you guys as well. Appreciate all the support. Appreciate all the Utah fans that tune in. For myself, Steve Bartle, for the Utah Blockcast. That'll do it for me. We'll be back Wednesday evening.